Welcome to the Vietnam Play podcast. I'm Jackson, and I'm joined by Nia. Foreign companies do not fail in Vietnam loudly. They fade slowly. The Vietnam Play helps leaders understand the choices that prevent expensive irrelevance. This podcast is made possible by 43.1, the full-stack market entry partner for foreign tech, fintech, and Web3 companies entering Vietnam. Nia, I've been looking at the data for May 2026, and it's striking how many executives are still getting this market dead wrong. They arrive thinking they're Columbus discovering a frontier, but the reality on the ground is a highly regulated, mature hub that just doesn't care about a generic global playbook.
It's so true, Jackson. That frontier mindset is actually the first step toward that slow fade you mentioned. By now, in mid-2026, the market has moved way past the Wild West phase. We're talking about an ecosystem where cashless transactions reached 295.2 quadrillion VND in 2024. That's 26 times the national GDP. If you're a fintech lead coming in thinking you're teaching the market how to use digital money, you've already lost. They aren't just using it. They're moving volumes of money that dwarf the actual economy.
Exactly. It's a sophisticated financial machine. And with the launch of the Vietnam International Financial Center in Ho Chi Minh City back in February 2026, the goalposts have shifted even further towards structure and regulation. You aren't competing with nothing. You're competing with a system that is, in many ways, more integrated than what you'd find in the West.
What's fascinating is that foreign companies often burn through their entire first quarter budget just trying to acquire users with the same old tactics, only to realize the users here have very specific, non-negotiable expectations. If you don't understand the psychological drivers behind how a Vietnamese user moves money, you're just lighting cash on fire.
And that brings us to the first major pillar of the current landscape. If you think your shiny new app is going to win because it has a better UI than a QR code, you're in for a very rude awakening. Let's dig into why the QR code isn't just a feature here, it's the entire rail.
I think the biggest culture shock for Western executives is the QR dominance. In the US or Europe, we're so used to NFC, that tap to pay with a card or a phone. But in Vietnam, the QR code is the king, queen, and the entire court. As of 2025, QR accounted for a massive 60% of the mobile payment market.
And it's not slowing down. In the first quarter of 2025 alone, QR payments surged by over 81%. That's not a trend. That's a total takeover. But here's the nuance. People often assume this happened because the tech for cards wasn't there. That's a total misconception. This was a deliberate, strategic infrastructure choice by the government.
Spot on. The State Bank of Vietnam and NAPAS, the National Payment Corporation, standardized the whole thing through Viet QR. It's a unified format. It doesn't matter if you're using a traditional bank app or a niche e-wallet. You scan the same code and it just works. It connects everyone. For the user, it's frictionless. For the merchant, it's incredibly low cost compared to maintaining card terminals.
I love that you mentioned the merchants. The adoption is nearly universal now. We're seeing 94% of SMBs, small and medium businesses, accepting real-time payments in store. That includes everyone from high-end boutiques in District 1 to the person selling coffee on a street corner. If your fintech product doesn't natively speak Viet QR, you effectively don't exist in the eyes of the Vietnamese consumer.
It's actually expanding beyond the borders now, too. Banks like Vietcombank are already pushing this into cross-border QR networks across Southeast Asia. So the rail is becoming regional. It's not just about how people pay in Hanoi anymore. It's about how they pay when they travel to Thailand or Cambodia using their Vietnamese accounts.
It makes you realize that any foreign company trying to disrupt this with a closed-loop system or a non-standard payment method is basically asking the user to work harder. And in 2026, no one has time for that. But while speed and ease are expected, there's something else that actually determines whether a user stays with you, and that's the trust factor.
This is where the speed is everything myth starts to fall apart. Yes, transactions need to be fast, but in Vietnam, fast is just the baseline. It's table stakes. What actually makes a user choose your platform over a competitor is the trust architecture you build around that speed.
It's interesting because we often hear that emerging markets are less concerned with privacy or security, but the data from 2026 tells a completely different story. A Visa report showed that 52% of Vietnamese consumers are deeply concerned about fraud and scams. They aren't just clicking pay blindly, they're worried about misdirected payments.
And that fear translates directly into churn. About 34% of users hesitate to fully commit to a digital platform because they find it hard to track their transactions, or they don't understand how the refund process works. If your app feels like a black box where money goes in and you hope for the best, you're going to lose a third of your potential market right there.
The State Bank of Vietnam actually leaned into this psychological need for security. Back in July 2024, they mandated strict biometric authentication for any transaction over 10 million VND. At the time, some thought it might slow things down, but it's actually become the psychological baseline. By now, in 2026, users expect that layer of protection. If a platform doesn't have it, it feels cheap or unregulated to them.
That's a powerful point. In this market, compliance isn't just a boring legal requirement you hand off to a lawyer. It's a competitive advantage. If you can show the user that you are following the state bank's directives to the letter, you are signaling that their money is safe. Foreign companies that try to bypass these local norms to save time end up destroying their reputation before they even scale.
You can't just fix trust in phase 2 of your rollout. Once a user feels like your dispute resolution is opaque or your security is flimsy, they're gone, and they'll go straight back to the super apps they already trust, apps that have integrated every aspect of their lives.
We have to talk about the all-in-one lifestyle. In many Western markets, we have a best-of-breed approach. One app for payments, one for food, one for rides. In Vietnam, that approach is a recipe for irrelevance. The giants like Momo, ZaloPay, and ShopeePay have conditioned everyone to expect an ecosystem, not just a feature.
It's about the daily operational life of the user. They want to pay their electricity bill, order lunch, book a bike, and buy a shirt without ever leaving the interface. And this has only intensified with the surge in shoppertainment. I mean, e-commerce grew by 43% in 2025, and it now makes up 11% of all retail sales.
That shoppertainment piece is huge. People are buying things directly through live streams. The payment flow has to be completely invisible and frictionless within that entertainment experience. If you're a foreign fintech trying to enter with a single feature app, say just a peer-to-peer lending tool or a standalone wallet, you're fighting an uphill battle against these integrated giants.
So what's the move for a newcomer? You basically have two paths, and neither of them is easy. You either have to integrate so deeply with an existing super app that you become a seamless part of their ecosystem, or you have to find a niche so specific that the big players are genuinely ignoring it.
And even then, finding that niche usually requires a strategic joint venture with a domestic bank or a tech conglomerate. You can't just sit in an office in Singapore and guess what that niche is. You need to be plugged into the local grid.
It's a high bar for entry. But while everyone is fighting over the urban users in Ho Chi Minh City who are already using 5 different super apps, there's a whole other side to the story that most foreign companies completely overlook.
This is the part of the data that really surprises people who only visit the big cities. The Vietnam story isn't just about the skyscrapers in District 1. By 2025, nearly 87% of Vietnamese citizens aged 15 and up had bank accounts. That is a staggering level of financial inclusion, and a lot of it happened because of an aggressive push from the government into rural areas.
Right, and the mobile money pilot was the real game changer there. We're looking at over 10.4 million registered mobile money accounts now. And here's the kicker. Over 72% of those accounts are held by users in rural, remote, or border areas.
Think about that. These aren't people with traditional bank accounts in many cases. They're accessing digital payments through their mobile phone subscriptions. For a Web3 company or a fintech focused on microlending or decentralized finance, this is actually the most exciting part of the market. This is a massive digital footprint in places where traditional banking infrastructure is basically non-existent.
But you can't approach these users with a complex, data-heavy financial dashboard. They prioritize low-friction, high-reliability tools. If it doesn't work on a basic connection, or if the interface is too techy, they won't touch it.
It's a completely different design philosophy. In the city, you're competing on lifestyle integration. In the rural areas, you're competing on pure utility and accessibility. Most foreign firms don't even have a strategy for the latter because they're too busy trying to disrupt the urban market.
It's a missed opportunity, but it also highlights why having feet on the ground is so critical. You can't understand the needs of a user in a remote border province from a boardroom in Dubai. The execution gap between a global strategy and a local reality is where the slow fade usually begins.
We see it all the time. A company has a perfect go-to-market deck. They've raised millions. They have a global PR narrative that sounds incredible. And then they actually try to launch in Vietnam, and the whole thing stalls out because they didn't realize the regulatory environment requires more than just a localized website.
Exactly. It's not just about translating your app into Vietnamese. It's about capital commitments, specific personnel qualifications, and building a relationship with the State Bank of Vietnam. You can't manage that remotely. The gap between that polished deck and a live, compliant operation is massive.
And that's really the core of what we're talking about today. You need the global credibility, what we often call the global PR narrative, but you also need the fractional local unit on the ground to actually do the work. You need someone handling the NotPos payment rail integration and making sure your community building isn't just a generic Telegram group.
It's a two-pronged approach. If your local compliance application gets rejected, or if local users abandon your app in the first week because the Viet QR integration is buggy, no amount of global funding is going to save you. You need that institutional credibility that comes from companies like Block PR for the global side, and then the on-the-ground execution from a partner like 43.1.
I think people underestimate how quickly the window of opportunity closes if your launch is messy. In a market this mature, you don't get a second chance to make a first impression. If you don't align with the state bank's directives from day one, you aren't just delayed. You're often blacklisted or viewed with extreme suspicion by the very partners you need to succeed.
It really comes down to the difference between wanting to be in Vietnam and actually wanting to operate in Vietnam. One is a vanity project, the other is a business. And for the latter, you have to respect the infrastructure that's already been built.
I want to circle back to that idea of compliance as a competitive advantage, because I think it's the most counterintuitive thing for many founders. Usually you think of compliance as the Department of No that slows down your marketing team. But in Vietnam's digital payment space, it's actually your best marketing tool.
It's because of that 52% fraud concern stat we mentioned earlier. When a user sees that an app requires the mandated biometric authentication for those 10 million VND plus transactions, they don't think, oh, this is a hassle. They think, this is a legitimate platform that won't let my money disappear.
It's a signal. In a market that's moved from fragmented to highly regulated, being the most compliant player is a way to differentiate yourself from the dozens of smaller fly-by-night operations that pop up and vanish. It's how you build that long-term relevance, rather than just a quick burst of growth that leads to a slow fade.
And let's be honest, the regulators here are not playing around. They've created a very structured hub for a reason. They want to protect the 295.2 quadrillion VND moving through the system. If you're a foreign company trying to play by your own rules, you're basically telling the regulators and the users that you don't respect the national economy.
It's also about the refund and tracking issue. If you have a clear, compliant dispute resolution system, you are solving the main reason 34% of users are currently hesitating to use digital platforms. You're literally unlocking a massive segment of the market just by being transparent and following the rules.
So instead of seeing the state bank's directives as a hurdle, look at them as a blueprint for what your users actually want. They want safety, they want biometric security, and they want to know that if something goes wrong, there's a real person and a real process to fix it.
So if we're putting together the playbook for a leader looking at Vietnam right now in May 2026, where do we start? First, you have to accept that the frontier is gone. You are entering a mature, structured market. You have to build for the QR rail first, not as an afterthought.
Right. And you have to decide on your ecosystem strategy. Are you going to integrate with the Momos and Zalopays of the world, or can you find a genuine gap in their service? Most likely you'll need a joint venture to even get a seat at the table.
Don't forget the rural opportunity. If your tech is too heavy or urban-centric, you're missing out on the 72% of mobile money users who are in remote areas. That's where the real financial inclusion growth is happening, and it requires a different kind of operational focus, low friction, high reliability.
And finally, you have to bridge that execution gap. You cannot lead this from afar. You need that local unit on the ground, people who understand the NAPA's integrations and the state bank's latest directives to ensure your global brand actually converts into local trust.
It's a lot to take in, but the rewards are massive for the companies that get it right. You're talking about a market where digital payments are 26 times the GDP. The money is moving. The question is whether your company is going to be a part of that flow or just another foreign brand that fades into irrelevance because they wouldn't adapt.
I think that's the perfect place to start wrapping things up. It's about respect. Respect for the local infrastructure, the local regulations, and the very real concerns of the Vietnamese user.
As we bring this to a close, I keep thinking about that 94% figure for SMBs accepting real-time payments. It's a reminder that the market isn't waiting for foreign companies to bring the future. The future is already here, and it's standardized, it's fast, and it's increasingly secure.
It really makes you realize that the slow fade isn't a result of bad technology. It's a result of bad assumptions. If you assume you know what a developing market looks like without looking at the 2026 data, you're already behind.
So for everyone listening, here's a question to take back to your team. Is your current Vietnam strategy built for the market as it exists today, or is it built for the frontier myth from 5 years ago? Are you leaning into compliance and the QR-first reality, or are you trying to force a global square peg into a Vietnamese round hole?
It's a tough question, but answering it honestly is the only way to prevent that expensive irrelevance we talked about at the top. Thank you for diving into these insights with us today.
Thanks for having me, Jackson. It's been a fascinating look at where things stand right now. I hope this gives our listeners some real clarity on their next steps.
Absolutely. Take some time to reflect on those rural adoption numbers and that trust security gap. There's a huge opportunity there if you're willing to do the work on the ground. Thanks for listening to the Vietnam Play.